Hi, friends. Welcome back. Today, I want to talk to you about a pretty traditional source of new teacher anxiety, and that is how should I be in the classroom? Or how should I present myself to the students? Or, as I thought of it when I was a new teacher, what do I do with my hands? I think this is a kind of a sneaking anxiety that comes up on teachers kind of unprepared because often, since we have been apprentices by observation, since we've seen teachers for so long doing this thing in the classroom, we think it must be easy. But often we get to the classroom and we realize that those teachers who made teaching look so easy, they were doing something that was a little bit magical and a little bit slippery. They were somehow removing a lot of the friction that other people find they encounter in the classroom. And just thinking back on what our teachers did when we were in the chairs won't necessarily help us to be successful presenters of ourselves in the classroom. The best advice, undoubtedly, is that we should just be ourselves in the classroom. We should be authentic. Students absolutely respond positively to authenticity. They can sniff out a fake and they don't respond well to a fake. And students need teachers to be authentic because they need to learn to be authentic themselves. And when they see teachers who behave authentically in front of them, it gives them permission to be authentic themselves, especially if a teacher is a little different than the other teachers, a little outside the box, a little more willing to be comfortable in their skin, which is all to say that being yourself and being authentic is a superpower for teachers in the classroom. That having been said, though, be yourself isn't always the easiest advice to follow. Who we are is often dependent on the context that we're in and who we're around. And being in a classroom as a classroom teacher in front of a room full of students who come from different backgrounds, different families, different economic classes, etc., etc., it's not a position that a lot of people have been in before. And a lot of people find that they have to be a new version of themselves. They have to be a professional version of themselves. They have to be a teacher version of themselves. Further, being yourself as a teacher is constrained by two really important obligations. One of these is that you have an obligation to manage your classroom, and the second is that you have an obligation to deliver your curriculum. And these can get in the way of you just being yourself. A teacher, because of their role, is a leader, and because they have to deliver content, they have to be authoritative. And being a leader and being authoritative isn't necessarily something that all people have in their toolbox. It's not something that everyone has authentically been before. I came to the profession through a non-traditional route, and so when I was kind of just dropped into the classroom, I had incredibly naive ideas that I would present myself to my students as professorial. I thought I just got done with college. I was so impressed with so many of my college teachers. I wanted to dazzle my students with my knowledge. I wanted to come across as someone who could speak with authority. I wanted to be a great mentor. What I found was I absolutely didn't have the tools in my toolbox to be any of these things. And instead of coming across as collegiate or professorial or a mentor, I came across very stiff, very difficult. I seemed like an adversary to my students. After 2 or 3 weeks, I began to realize I needed help. I needed to see what other teachers were doing. I started standing outside other teachers' classrooms during my plan period to see what the good teachers in the building were doing, the best teachers who were teaching the regular track classes, the best teachers who were teaching the honors classes. And one of the things I saw almost immediately was that none of the teachers in the building seemed like they were presenting themselves collegiately or professorially. And really, most of the teachers who were the best teachers in the room didn't even really seem like capital T teachers. What I saw instead was women who seemed to be mothering their students through classes and men who seemed to be fathering their students through classes. I saw men who coached basketball or football and women who coached volleyball or track or soccer, and they were coaching their students through their subject matter. Rather than present as capital T teachers, they were falling into other hierarchical leadership roles that students were familiar with. And the students who might have been uncomfortable with capital T teachers were very comfortable with these more familial, more coach and athlete roles. And the classes seemed to have lower stakes, lower barriers, and the students were getting on board, they were getting comfortable, and people were learning things. Some of the teachers who were younger, who maybe couldn't have pulled off fatherly or motherly or coach, a lot of them came across as older sisters or older brothers. When I went back to my classroom, I knew that I had no business trying to come across as a college professor. And really, even being a real teacher was probably outside of my reach. I started behaving towards my students as if I was their older brother who had been there before. I started acting as if I wasn't really there to teach, but rather prepare my students for real teachers. And this turned out to be enormously successful because the truth about a lot of my students was a lot of them weren't real students yet. A lot of them were just adolescents who had been unwillingly thrust into the role of student, and they didn't really know how to do it. They needed coaching on how to be students. And when I stopped pretending, putting on airs, building a wall between myself and my students, and acting like I was standing on top of it or on the other side of it, and I came down to work with them, my students responded by ceasing some of the defensive behaviors that I had seen from them earlier in the year, some of the heads down, some of the looking at phones, some of the talking to friends or leaning back in their chairs, and they engaged with me in my class. As an 18th year teacher now, I've had a lot of time to reflect on some of those mistakes I made in my first year or two, or three or four or five. And it seems to me now that when I was trying to be professorial, it wasn't really that I wanted to be a great bestower of knowledge for my students, but rather I wanted to disguise my insecurities. I didn't want to be vulnerable to my students and admit what I didn't know. And when I ceased trying to do that and I came down to my students' level and admitted when I didn't know things, admitted that I was new, admitted that we were going to struggle through together, my students saw my authenticity and my vulnerability and they responded to it. That can help me segue into this classroom dynamic I've been thinking about for a while. And that is in any classroom, on one side, you have the material, and on the other side, you have the students. And as the teacher, if you line yourself up with the material, you kind of line yourself up in opposition to the students. What you want to do is you want to line yourself up with the students and you want to help them conquer the material. If you're on the side of the material instead of on the side of the students, you become their adversary. And if you switch that around, you become their ally. And if they sense that you are their ally, they will become your ally. Before I sign out, I do have one caution for you, and that is you should not try and be your student's friend. Well, you should absolutely try and be friendly to your students. You should not be their friend. To take on a persona or a role where you are in a parenting position or an older sibling position or a coaching position, you have a hierarchy. You have someone with more experience, someone who's in charge, someone who is following the orders, following the commands, someone who's following. If you make yourself your student's friend, you put yourself on their level, and that's not a place you want to be. That's a place that opens a lot of doors for a lot of trouble. Anywho, I would love to engage with you in the comments if you have tips for new teachers on how they should present themselves in the classroom, if you have thoughts on authenticity, if you're a new teacher who has questions about this or any questions they want me to answer. Thank you so much. Good luck in your classrooms. Happy teaching.